We are pleased to have the President and CEO of Alberta Energy Regulator joining us today from Calgary to discuss the future that lies ahead for part of Alberta's energy resources. Mr. Laurie Pushor, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
Now, with all of the various government agencies and levels of government, can you really explain the role of the Alberta Energy Regulator that's been around for 83 years? What's your mandate?
Well, we came together under the new label Alberta Energy Regulator 7 or 8 years ago. And the mandate at that time was to be a full life cycle regulator. And for us, that means you apply to us to actually drill a well right through reclaiming it when it's completed its productive life. So we're the place you have to come after you've been given the right to explore or develop any oil or gas product in the province.
Now, we often hear from our Alberta politicians that our province has pretty high standards for energy resource development. Now, in your opinion, Laurie, how do our environmental standards and treatment of industry workers compare to other countries?
Well, I think it's fair for Albertans to know that we operate at the highest standards on the planet, or at least among the very highest standards anywhere compared to any other jurisdiction. And so our job at the regulator is to ensure that all companies are operating at those standards. One of the things we are working on right now is to increase the access to the data we have and the knowledge we have. So you'll see over the next while an expansion of a new product we have on our website called our Data Hub, and you can see how industry is performing on water usage, air emissions, and a number of things like that. As a regulator, we're not going to get into too much around whether we're the best or the worst or whatever. That's for government and others to talk about. We want to be the trusted source of information on how industry is performing, and then that'll inform a good conversation for all Albertans.
So when a company doesn't adhere to your standards, what kind of steps do you take to ensure that they do?
Well, we here in Alberta have a very wide-ranging number of options to deal with problems. If we see something that we believe poses an immediate risk to the environment or an immediate risk to human health and safety, we can immediately close that operation in and padlock it with our own locks, and until such time as the producer has addressed whatever issue there is, it'll remain locked, and it'll be us that allows them to go back into production. Those are extreme cases where we see an imminent risk. We have a series of administrative tools we can use to bring someone into compliance. And then, of course, we also have penalties of our own that we can issue for fines. And then we can also refer the matter to the justice, to our colleagues in justice for more formal prosecutions. We find, by and large, it's very rare that we have to get to issuing fines. Our administrative operations or our administrative tools can be pretty powerful in terms of ultimately, if someone isn't complying, we start taking away their right to operate or their right to continue to do business. So it really lets us lean in pretty hard. It means we don't have to say it very often most of the time.
So it is very rare, right? So Laurie, when it comes to resource development, what role does Alberta Energy Regulator play in the rights of landowners?
Well, landowners are a great ally for us in the work we do at the regulator. They're so close to the operations out there. Our field team are out there doing inspections and monitoring, but a landowner is right there and can see what's going on. So we will be involved in any complaints around the operations. We don't get involved in the commercial relationship around rents and those things. But if a landowner thinks something doesn't look right on a site, or there's an odor complaint, or something doesn't look as they might think it should, then we're the people to call, and we'll come out and have a look and get the company moving in the right direction.
Is there much of a relationship between our post-secondaries, our universities and colleges here in the province, and your group as Alberta-based researchers really look to develop new energy resources?
Well, we're home to the Alberta Geological Survey, and so as the province has moved into their new minerals strategy, we're through that geological survey very actively involved in a lot of work. There are a lot of collaborations with academic institutions across the province. Our core research center, which houses every single piece of core that's ever been drilled in this province, it's a massive facility. It actually exists on the University of Calgary site, and there are a lot of academic researchers in and out of that space every day. So there's good collaborations in those spaces. as we look into these new mineral resources and geothermal and brine minerals and where there might be other mining opportunities in the province, we expect to be seeing more and more of that type of collaboration.
You know, certain politicians have talked about really tapping into more of the mineral resources here in the province and reaching out to many other markets, larger markets around the world. Can you talk about the development when it comes to our mineral resources? Is it pretty big right now?
It's pretty modest right now in Alberta. Alberta's the folks at the survey tell me there are mineral opportunities in the province. One of the challenges Alberta's had over the years is you always ran into oil or natural gas at such profound opportunities. It was hard to keep looking for something else. We have a couple active projects right now doing pilots on geothermal development, and that would be large scale geothermal where you're drilling something akin to an oil well to produce that heat resource.
Right.
There's a couple of those underway in the province. We have in the brines, there's a lot of water that's produced in association with gas or oil. And there's a lot of minerals in those brines. And so there's a pilot project or two underway right now to find new ways to process those minerals out of those brines. So that's advancing. And then the Geological Survey just did a massive piece of public geoscience that we're busy trying to get disseminated out. And we can talk more about it if you like, but taking a look across the province at where other opportunities might exist.
We hear a lot about orphaned wells here in Alberta. Laurie, can these abandoned sites be utilized in the geothermal process?
Well, there's lots of people looking to see what the opportunities might look like in that space and whether some of the existing wells and infrastructure out there can be used. One of the key things about the geothermal resource, though, is controlling that energy really is essential to it. If you ever lost the reservoir pressures or any of those types of things, your resource kind of evaporates on you. So it's a pretty active conversation right now of whether it's better to develop a new well so you have full control of it or repurpose existing wells. And we'll see how industry innovates in that space.
Tell me about the connection or maybe the relationship between geothermal and the oil and gas sector.
Well, if you see a geothermal well being drilled, you won't know it. It looks like you're drilling an oil well or a gas well. So they're very similar in that respect. The difference will be once they move towards production. And so we have lots of opportunities for production where you have injection and extraction occurring in paired wells or things like that. That's a bit of the foundation of geothermal. The difference will be there will become a generator will be located there at some point in time. So a turbine would be installed and you'd be doing that, or it would be connected in for use as a heating operation if you've got a facility nearby that you want to heat.
What has been the appetite so far from industry relating to Alberta's geothermal resources?
It's I guess some preliminary steps is really all that's happened. We know there's a number of companies that are looking at the resource, and we have a couple pilot projects underway as we speak, but we haven't seen it. It's a couple of years away from seeing an operational industry out there.
Can you give us maybe a brief snapshot of what geothermal projects do for Alberta communities?
Well, it'll depend on how successful they are in exploiting the resource. There's differing opinions on how valuable the resource is and where the right places are. I know out towards Drayton Valley, up in the Fox Creek area, there's some people think there's a pretty good resource in there. And it's going to take some time to prove out just the viability of that. What it would mean in the long term is you would have a good, reliable, clean source of energy with very little, if any, carbon emissions. And so that would be pretty encouraging. I know of a couple of projects right now but they're still pretty small. So, in the overall generation strategy, it'll be a small factor for a few years.
How about some projects in our region here, maybe in Southwestern Alberta, Lethbridge, or even Southeastern Alberta near Medicine Hat?
Well, I'm off the top of my head. I don't think there's any geothermal projects down there right now. One of the interesting opportunities down towards Medicine Hat is the emergence of helium. And the helium resource is in pretty high demand right now. It's used in not just helping yourself talk like Mickey Mouse, but it's also used in a lot of medical procedures. It's a key element used in MRIs as an example. So there's a lot of exploration and development underway in that space. And so we'll watch the build out of that, but there's no question there'll be a lot of growth in that area.
So Laurie, let's talk more about geothermal. Will this eventually be similar to what we're seeing in Iceland, where they not only have the hot water pools, but also heating homes and sidewalks with geothermal resources?
Well, that's yet to be proven in terms of the scale or the size of the geothermal resource that might be available in Alberta. For Iceland, it's so much closer to the surface that the resource doesn't degrade the same way it might here, depending on the depth they're coming from. So we'll see how it proves out over time. But it's certainly, there will be geothermal energy produced in Alberta. There's no question about that.
Now let's talk about its impact and benefits of geothermal resources. And let's talk a bit about the extraction work. Laurie, how does the work impact the land and environment when compared to that of the oil and gas sector?
It's going to look and seem a lot like an oil and gas operation. The difference would be there's not hydrocarbons being produced. And so, the risk will be a little bit different. There will be brine circulating and some of those things as part of it. So it'll really depend on that. But they're high performing industries, and we expect they'll be operating at very high standards. So it should look akin to an oil or natural gas facility, and they're in the environmental space. So we expect them to be very mindful of the site and how they operate their sites.
What about the long-term benefits geothermal resources could provide to Albertans and resource companies?
Well, I think you might have to talk to some people beyond us. We are a regulator who's here to make sure it's done properly. There will be others that will be forecasting what the generation mix in Alberta will be. Right now, it'll be a few years before you see geothermal being a resource that starts to play a significant role in the total generation of the province. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and the scale they'll be able to generate.
What are some of the challenges that geothermal businesses are running into right now, trying to develop this resource?
Well, it's going to be understanding how the resource is going to perform. So you talked about Iceland. I mean, that's very near surface. They have good understanding of how much heat they'll be able to extract. Some of the geothermal resources here are at deeper depths, and therefore it'll be a little while as they prove out the long-term performance of those assets.
Now you have framework put in place that we discussed a little bit earlier. Let's talk about the framework development. And does it come as a result of requests from established businesses looking to develop our geothermal resource?
Well, we have an opportunity within our regulatory structures to create a pilot regulation, and we started with geothermal that way, where we hadn't built geothermal regulations at that point in time, so we were able to build a pilot project with them. It works well for them, but it also works well for us because we can learn how to regulate the facility alongside industry as they develop. But we have just released our new regulatory structure around geothermal, and that gives companies good, predictable understanding of what the expectations are, and they can go on about their business of planning their projects.
So Laurie, big picture here, do you have any projections of how large the geothermal sector could really grow in Alberta?
We haven't done much forecasting yet on it. We do an annual energy forecast. We call it ST98. It's a forecast of the amount of oil and gas and other things, and we're continuing to add resources to that over time. So, we will be getting into that space, but right now it's still pretty early days to give a good, reliable forecast.
Laurie Pushor is the CEO of Alberta Energy Regulator. Thanks so much for joining us today from Calgary.
Thank you very much. Appreciated the chat.